Welcome to another edition of Jazz Smack, where tonight we are going to discuss exactly where the franchise is in terms of, are they trying to win games? Or are they actually trying to lose again? Because quite frankly, it looks like they might be leaning into losses purposefully once again. And then we're going to discuss the defensive ratings under the Will Hardy era of Jazz, which means the last 3+ seasons. And we're also going to discuss where exactly the Jazz stand in the lottery results as of today. And because there are a lot of people talking about this draft and how enticing some of those top draft choices look this coming lottery season. So let's talk about it.
Jazz Smack, NBA and Utah Jazz basketball.
So, in my opinion, I think with the way that it looks in terms of how the Jazz are starting to rest players, at least it looks that way from an outside appearance, and how they're really leaning into the younger guys. I mean, Will Hardy says he wants to give the younger guys more minutes, and that's why he's doing this resting. But let's face it, that also has to do with the wins and losses. And I think the Jazz, as a franchise, they realize at this point they still need roster improvement in terms of getting like high-level prospects. So that has to be a priority for the Jazz this year. We all know the situation they're in with the draft pick. If it falls out of the top 8, the pick goes to OKC. And the Jazz don't have another first-round draft choice this year. If they lose that pick to OKC, unless they trade back into the draft, they are out of the first round. And that, in the current, where the Jazz currently fall, that can't happen. So, like we said before, if they lose that OKC pick, they have to trade back in to the first round in order to have a first-round pick. So I think the front office, regardless of what Austin Ainge said this summer, I think the front office has talked to Will Hardy and have told him specifically, yeah, we need to rest some guys. We need some guys to not play some nights because we can't lose that pick. I mean, if they lose that pick, that's a big, big issue.
I just wish they would have had that discussion a month and a half ago. That's what I wish they would have had the discussion on, because we don't want to emphasize tanking on this podcast. Our goal is not to lose games, but we realistically are trying to look at the situation in the NBA and what it takes to build a roster. Now, the reality is we've had 3 very tough seasons, and this one being the 4th tough season. Out of those very, very difficult seasons, we got a number 9 pick, a number 10 pick, and a number 5 pick. That is management incompetence. That should not be the case out of all of those. Now, even if you're like the biggest Keontae fan or Flip fan, where you say, look, we got some steals, great. You can still say that we got steals later in the draft. You still got to take more shots on goal and you need those high picks. And so that's what we have to keep that pick this year. And we have to do everything we can to keep that pick, because we don't want to have a wasted season that we don't have a good, a high shot on goal that's going to lead to a high first round draft pick or a first round draft pick.
And let me preface this. I hate tanking. I hate it. I hate talking about it. I hate thinking about it. I hate watching the team purposely lose. It sucks. For lack of a better word, it just stinks. So I don't want to see the team purposely lose, but where the Jazz currently are, they're in a really tough spot. I mean, if they had other first-round opportunities this coming season, but they don't even have that. And so you can't have another season, especially how top-heavy this draft looks like it's going to be. They've got to be in the discussion, at least give themselves an opportunity to get that pick one of those picks, maybe get lucky in the lottery, even if they're not in the one of the top 4 worst records. If they're in the top 8, at least they have a shot at it. At least they have a shot at it. Now, I'm not advocating one way or the other if they're going to be in the one of the 4 worst records or 5, 6, 7, or 8, whatever. But at least they have a shot at it. But they just can't. They can't go into this next draft without a first-round draft choice. That just where the Jazz are, that can't happen. And so something has to be done. And I think that the franchise as a whole has realized that. And we'll see what happens from here. But it certainly looks like, from my perspective, it looks like they've had that discussion and they're leaning into that now, realizing that what they have and the players they have, they're not going to be good enough to compete for something meaningful. And so that they would end up just being a middling team. We know the Jazz can probably win in the upper in the 380, 400, around there, just because of their home court advantage. I think this roster, especially with Walker, can probably win 40% of their games at minimum if they try. But they're not going to be in line for a title, and that was the whole purpose of trading away Donovan and Rudy and all those players. So that's where the Jazz stand right now.
I completely agree. I couldn't say it better. Is I don't want to tank. The reality is, we need shots on goal and we need high shots on goal. And the key is, if you were in the draft, say with Stephen Castle or something like that, and you said, you know something, I don't think I want to pay him what's guaranteed at that rate, which is $10 million a year for the top few draft picks. You know something? If you have a number 3 or number 4 pick, the ransom you can get from going number 3 to number 4 to number of 10 is probably 3 first-round draft picks. So the goal is, you get a high pick. If you don't like what's there, you trade out of it and get more down the line, right? And pick like 9th or 10th or whatever. But you have so much currency by being that high in the draft that you've got to take a shot on it. And honestly, we wasted 2 years. You may have still picked Cody and Taylor by trading back, but you would have picked up so many assets to do that. You've got to do it this year. And I agree with you. Somebody came to the realization. I don't think it's Ryan Smith, because he's the guy that brought the young Ainge in, but one of the Ainges or Zanuck or somebody came to the realization and finally talked to Hardy.
Well, let's look at, even though we're talking about this up front, we still don't want this to be the focus of this podcast, because both of us hate tanking. And I know that the audience out there also hates tanking, and talking about it just endlessly, podcast over podcast, is absolutely pointless and serves no purpose. So let's move on to another subject that, quite frankly, it's enlightening looking at these numbers, but it's not exactly encouraging. Let's just put that right up front. So we're going to look at the defensive rating of the Utah Jazz under Will Hardy's leadership. And we're going to look at not only this year, but we're going to look at the 3 previous seasons where they finished in that defensive rating according to NBA.com and their advanced stats. So first of all, let's take a look at the defensive rating starting with this season, the 25-26 season so far. And the Jazz, and we're going to look at this from a relative perspective, where the Jazz are relative to the other 29 teams in the NBA. So, as of right now, the Jazz are 29th in the NBA in defensive rating. That is this column right here, for those of you watching on YouTube, and they are at 121.2. So that's 29th out of 30 teams. Now, let's look at the previous...
You didn't share the screen.
So this is 29th out of 30 teams. And this is the column we're looking at. So the Jazz right now are at 121.2 in defensive rating so far this year. So let's look at the previous 3 seasons, starting at that first season under Will Hardy. In that first season, as you can see here, a defensive rating, the year 22-23, If we scroll down, the Jazz actually were 23rd that year. That's where they finished. And that defensive rating was 116. Now, the Jazz, that was their best year. They certainly started out the year really well, and people were really excited because they were winning games. They had all those veteran players, which certainly aids in their ability to play defense. And they had some guys who were really hustle-oriented on that team. Yeah, they had some poor defenders too. Olynyk is not a good defender, but they had guys that understood how to play defense at least, and they were rotation players in the NBA. So 23rd, still not a great number. Not a great number to finish that year, 23rd in the NBA on defense. So let's look at the next year. The next year, the 23-24 season, and where the Jazz finished. The Jazz finished dead last at 119.6. So again, not good. Last year, which was the full-on tank year, obviously, and where the Jazz finished? They finished dead last again at 119.4 in defensive rating, according to NBA.com, advanced stats. So, as we're saying, they're basically finishing at the bottom of the league the last 3 seasons because, make no mistake about it, they're 29th right now in defense. They're going to finish in the bottom 5, at minimum the bottom 5, and maybe either 30th or 29th at the end of this year, because we do not see the defense improving. And this is like Ainge said after the end of the second year, and he said that we have to see improvement on defense, and we aren't seeing improvement on defense. So where does the fault lie? And we've talked about this before. I think still the fault lies in both the players and the coach. I mean, if you put a really defensive-minded coach out there, if Rick Majerus were coaching this team, would the Jazz be 29th or 30th in the NBA in defense? No. Absolutely, unequivocally, no. If Jerry Sloan were coaching this team, would the Jazz be 29th or 30th in defense? Any of the previous 3+ seasons? No, absolutely not. Now, if this Jazz team, if the Jazz current roster was the 96 Chicago Bulls roster and Will Hardy were the coach, would the Utah Jazz be 30th in the NBA in defense? No, absolutely not. I don't believe they would be number 1, but they would certainly be a lot better than they are. But it's a combination of those two things. We have to see improvement. At some point, somebody in management and ownership or something has to come out and say, like Ainge did after that second year, say something has to change, that we have to see improvement. Right now, we are not seeing improvement, and it is actually alarming at this point how poor the Utah Jazz have played defense over the last 3+ seasons.
Let me ask you something. Go to the last season and then see who's at the top of the defensive rating. So in 25-26.
25-26, it's OKC.
Yeah, I understand that. But look down. Golden State is number 3. And the point I want to make on Golden State is think of who's on their roster. Tell me who are the good defensive players on Golden State's roster. And I'm not a Steve Kerr fan. I am the last from the Steve Kerr, anybody associated with I got to be in front of the camera from the pop school. Generally, I'm not a big fan of, and I'm not a big fan of Steve Kerr. Loved him as a player, don't like him as a coach. But they're number 3. Tell me the great defensive players on Golden State.
At this point, considering their age, they have none. I mean, they have some defensive-minded guys, but those guys, I mean, Draymond, and
35.
Steph, yeah. I mean, they're all
bad.
Yeah, they're all old players, really old. Jimmy Butler, I mean, they're all old players. I mean, their athleticism has declined significantly from where they were 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, that's the reality of where those players are. Yet, yeah, they're still defending.
Yeah, Pods is pretty good. I was actually looking because I was curious. Pods is a pretty good defensive player. I was surprised because you wouldn't expect it out of Pods, but he tries. They got Peyton, also relatively old, but, good defensive player. I think Draymond can still play defense. But overall, a lot of their players are not good defensive players at all. At center, they don't have anything at all, right? And so they're doing it because something is motivating them. Is it Draymond pushing them to become to good defense? Is it Steve Kerr teaching them to play defense? Because you just gave the Jazz stats. That was Conley, Vando, etc. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are guys that already knew how to play defense. You know, they did not learn from good old Will. They knew how to play defense. They were motivated. The people that Will has trained for 3 years now are not playing defense. It's hard to argue against that because they're last in the league every year.
Well, it's just, you watch the games and you see the missed assignments and the poor rotations, and you think there's something just flawed with this scheme that he's putting out there. The guys are just constantly lost. Like, it's just, some of the plays you see on defense, you go, my gosh, I mean, you would get yanked in a high school game if you were to do that, some of these plays. And then these guys just keep on playing. It's just, it's truly remarkable, in all honesty. I mean, you see the opposing announcers for these teams I always watch the opposing team's feed, and I see what they say, and they go, well, the Jazz are so poor defense. And then, in one of the recent games, well, the Utah Jazz, it's remarkable how uncompetitive they are on the defensive end. That's what the announcers are saying multiple times. And you look at that and you go, okay, so it's not just me. Everyone else can see it too. And they're not just looking at the numbers. They're just looking at, it's the old eyeball test of looking at what's on the floor and thinking, wow, something is very, very flawed in this whole thing here.
And if you look at the numbers, it supports it. And the guys that are being criticized and yanked out for lack of defense actually are playing better defensively, statistically, than the ones that they're being left in. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to do. And honestly, they're not learning good habits. So if you're saying, look, some of these guys are going to be with our team, great, but it's not good habits you're teaching them. You're teaching them that it's okay to be bad defensively and you're still going to get minutes. That shouldn't be the message.
All right. We've taken a look at this. We want to go back to where the Jazz currently sit in terms of the lottery. They're in 8th place right now, the 8th worst record. So the Jazz lose their pick if they fall out of after the lottery. I mean, after the ping pong balls are dropped, if they fall, out of those top 8 spots, then they lose the pick. So in light of that, let's look at this. So they're in the 8th spot right now, which is right here. So as you can see over here, these red numbers mean that they lost, so being in the 8th spot, according to the statistical probabilities, the Jazz have a 39% chance of losing that first round pick if they finish in the 8th spot when the ping pong balls are drawn. A 39% chance. So if they really want to realistically ensure from a probability perspective that they actually keep their first round pick, they really need to finish no worse than the 6th worst record. And that would give them still a 3.8% chance of falling out of the top 8. But once you get beyond that, even if they finish 7th, that's 12.9 plus 1.3. That's not great. That's a 14% chance of losing your pick. So you really have to go up to that where you're under 5% chance from my standpoint. So that means finishing in with one of the 6 worst records in the NBA, and they're currently in 8th. So it's right now they're in a pretty precarious position. Now there's still a lot of games to be played. There's still a good portion of the season. They've played just a fraction of the season so far. So things can realistically change. But we still want the games to be competitive too. We don't want blowouts. And we've seen the blowouts, especially on the road. And the Jazz are still, after tonight's game, they're still +4 at home versus road. So they have, they've played 4 more home games than road games. So they have to equal that out. And we know that The Jazz, when they're going on the road, it's really difficult for that team. No matter who they play, they can play Lowry, they can play their full lineup, and it's going to be difficult to win on the road.
Right. But as you said, and I was supposed to do an analysis this weekend and I didn't because I was busy. But as you said, they can play all their young players. They got a 50-50 shot of winning at home. It's just that big of an advantage of coming into Salt Lake. A lot of other teams just sit down their best player. It's known over the years LeBron doesn't play in Utah, et cetera. Now he does, but they've sat him down multiple times because he doesn't want to play. It's a very difficult place to come play. It's the altitude. It's the loudness of the fans. It's whatever the fans say. And I think misrepresenting all the bad things they say. I don't know if a lot of that's true, but whatever it is, it's a very difficult place to play. And I didn't realize how drastic these numbers. I didn't look at the number 8, but the point I wanted to make on the number 7 is we tried last year, and a lot of other podcasts that talked about let's get in the top 3. The top 3 do a couple things for you. If you're the top 1, it means you can't drop to past number 5. Good thing. That's what happened to us last year. But it gives you a 14% chance of the number 1 pick. Well, guess what? Number 7 gives you a 14% chance of losing the pick. And we were trying our best last year to get a 14% chance of getting the number 1 pick. And that's the same probability that we would have of losing it going to number 7. So I just wanted to emphasize that is 14% doesn't sound like a lot, but given that Atlanta jumped, Dallas jumped, up last year, we, on lower odds, you don't want to be in that position where you could lose it and waste a whole year.
Yeah, if the Jazz are leaning into losing games, they really need to get. I mean, you can't just finish with the 8th worst record. If you're going to try and lose games, you got to put yourself in a position where you're actually going to keep that pick. You don't want a wasted year where you say, "Oh, okay, we're going to have this 7th or 8th going into the lottery. We're going to be in this number 7 or 8 position." You can't do that. The franchise is in a position where they just can't do that. So you got to be higher. You got to have a worse record than that. That's the reality. That's the unfortunate reality of where the Jazz find themselves right now, because they are still in the talent acquisition stage of building a team.
Yeah, and let's just look at the teams above them. Washington, Indiana are losing on purpose. Indiana's rumored to maybe trade Mathurin. Sacramento is trying to trade away their players if they can find a buyer. The biggest challenge with Sacramento is, can they find a buyer with the big salaries of those people? But if they do, that team is going to be brutal. Those bottom 3s are going to be really tough to catch at this point, even though they're only 3-4 games below us. They're still going to be really, because they're not going to win a lot of games. Clippers are going to rise because they lost their pick. Oklahoma City, there's no motivation for them to lose. They're not going to lose. I think they will pass us up. New Orleans, I think, is going to tank downward, but they're actually winning some games, surprisingly. So New Orleans is one that actually could pass us as well. And then Brooklyn is surprisingly winning some games too. I would think they would be tanking, but maybe because they've accumulated many picks that they don't care. I don't know. But New Orleans is also one, and Charlotte, I think, is motivated to win. So that's one. But the best I could see us doing in the best case scenario is dropping to number 4. I don't think we go above that. And that's still crossing over, a lot of teams that are above us. So that's going to be challenging to do.
Yeah, and it's going to be challenging to do with still where you want to keep the games competitive. It's vitally important the Jazz keep the games competitive for development reasons. It's super important. So we'll see what happens. All we can say is that's where things stand right now, and it certainly looks like the Jazz are, in the lose again mode. Unfortunately, I think that we can all unequivocally say that we don't want the Jazz to purposely lose games, but that's the situation that the franchise is in at the current time, unfortunately. All right.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Well, anything else for this evening? I think we'll call it a call it an evening and call it quits for this edition of Jazz Smack.
No, one thing we're going to talk about next time is the NBA came out with some anti-tanking ideas. It was just things that were leaked, but it's really interesting what some of those are. We're not going to talk about them tonight, but maybe some more will come out about that before our next podcast, and we can talk about it, because we both looked at the ideas that they had and we're kind of scratching our heads. So we want to get input from others, but talk about those in our next podcast.
Absolutely. So we are going to call it a night. For those watching on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. You can also follow us on X at Jazz Smack. And we hope everybody has a Merry Christmas, and we will talk to everybody later.